My name is Philip Dutton, and I am a supervising engineer here at the Division of Water Rights. I'm a program manager. And with me today, we have Eric Ekdahl, Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights, Aaron Ragazzi, Assistant Deputy Director, and Mariana Awi with our Office of the Chief Counsel. We are here to present an item on the proposed readoption of the emergency regulation for the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds. As part of this presentation, we'll also be joined with Crystal Robinson from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, who will provide a brief update on the fisheries and other important information related to the proposed readoption of the regulation. Slide. Here's an outline of the items we'll cover in this presentation, starting with some background on recent related items and the board's authority to adopt an emergency regulation, followed by an update on the current conditions in the watershed and during the terms of the emergency regulation. Crystal from CDFW will then present. Then I'll highlight some items and comments during the staff's November outreach and engagement efforts and provide a summary of proposed updates to the current regulation, which includes a change sheet. Finally, I'll cover comments on the proposed item and potential next steps. Slide. As a quick review of how we got here today, the board adopted the current emergency regulation that went into effect February 1st, 2024. It is set to expire on January 31st of this year. At its October 16th, 2024 board meeting, the board adopted a resolution regarding flow efforts in the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds. The resolution provided direction to staff on immediate and long-term flow-related efforts. Related to today's item, in the immediate term, staff were directed to solicit input on readoption of the emergency regulation and any changes that would be appropriate, as well as seeking alternatives to readoption. Board staff held a written comment period soliciting input on the potential readoption of the current emergency regulation, including those changes to the regulation and requesting proposals for alternatives to readoption. As part of this process, on November 12th, board staff held a public meeting to receive additional comments. No alternative were submitted, but staff did receive comments related to potential updates to the regulation. The regulation proposed for readoption today is the result of board's direction to staff and input received from interested parties. Next slide, please. The fiscal impacts. These were calculated in a similar manner to last year, with the fiscal impacts estimated for 3 different flow forecast scenarios: an expected range scenario based on the state of flows in October 24, an extreme drought scenario, and an above average scenario. The fiscal analysis is conservative in that it addresses uncertainty with assumptions that increase fiscal impact. Under the board's direction from October, staff are working towards a much more refined approach. The State Water Board estimates the total cost to all state and local agencies due to the proposed emergency regulation as $1.56 million for the expected range scenario, estimated $2.3 million for the extreme drought scenario, and approximately $374,000 for the above average scenario. As shown on the slide, the estimated costs from the agencies are focused on 4 categories: revenue losses for municipal water supply agencies, revenue losses for non-municipal water supply agencies, county and state agricultural tax revenue losses, and reporting costs. The estimate of fiscal costs from the different agencies are reported under different hydrologic scenarios, and the reporting costs remain the same for each of the scenarios. Water Code 1058.5 allows the board to adopt emergency regulations to address a declared drought emergency. As noted in this slide, the governor has issued proclamations declaring and maintaining a drought emergency for the Klamath River watershed and noting the need to expeditiously mitigate the effects of drought conditions in the Klamath River. Next slide. The Klamath River watershed, which includes the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds, has been experiencing ongoing and long-term drought since 2000, with periods of extreme drought punctuated with periods of improved conditions. The fisheries of these watersheds have been impacted by these conditions, which are amplified under dry conditions when water resources are increasingly scarce and the fact that emergency minimum flows are not met without curtailments in most recent water years. These periods of extreme drought within a long-term drought and consistent low flow conditions have contributed to fishery declines in the Klamath watershed, which is an important fishery for the tribe's commercial and recreational fishing. The West Coast commercial salmon and recreational fishing has been completely shut down multiple times over the past few decades and was closed in 2024 for a second year in a row due to concerns related to fish stocks. At the same time, tribes have foregone their commercial subsistence and commercial fishing rights, which has detrimental impacts to the tribe's economy, community health, and culture. Fish impacted by the most recent severe drought conditions will be returning in the fall of 2025, specifically fish that outmigrated in 2022. This morning, the flow at the USGS gauge at Fort Jones in the Scott River watershed was 2,390 cubic feet per second, or CFS, and the flow at the USGS gauge at Wairika in the Shasta River watershed was 393 CFS. These flows are above the minimum flow requirements of 200 CFS and 125 CFS for the Scott River and Shasta Rivers, respectively. Storage volumes at Dwinell Reservoir in the Shasta River watershed was 25,200 acre-feet yesterday, approximately 50% of capacity. At this point in similar years, it was 8,000 acre-feet in 2023 and 11,500 acre-feet in 2024. This water year has started well, with an estimated snow water equivalent in the Scott and Shasta watersheds that is well above the average for this time of year. However, it should be noted that snowpack at this time of year is not a good indicator for the water year or of flows that will occur during the drier summer months. Most of the snowpack in the Klamath River watershed falls between January through March. The snowpack can be dynamic and change rapidly through the winter. Water availability for the Scott River and Shasta Rivers in summer of 2025 will depend greatly on the snowpack levels in April and May. Additionally, midwinter high flow events and localized flooding are not a reliable indicator of river flows in the drier months to come. For example, in February 2015, the Scott River watershed experienced high flow events peaking at 5,390 CFS, but flows in August of that year decreased to as low as 5 CFS. For these reasons, it is too early to predict water availability for the Scott and Shasta River watersheds later this year. Next slide, please. The emergency regulation establishes minimum in-stream flow requirements and provides authority to curtail water rights to meet those flow requirements. It also allows for groundwater local cooperative solutions that reduce groundwater diversions earlier in the season than would occur with curtailment. Many factors influence hydrology in these watersheds, including evapotranspiration rates that may be impacted by smoke from fires, planned and incidental groundwater recharge, such as projects completed by the Scott Valley Irrigation District, groundwater levels across the basin, and other diversions. As noted on this slide here, during the term of the emergency regulation, staff have observed higher stream flows, improved water temperatures, habitat availability, and groundwater levels, which benefit the fisheries. The emergency regulations have also accelerated staff's understanding of these watersheds, increased dialogue with key parties, promoted data sharing, and resulted in some lasting water efficiency improvements. Looking at the Scott River, the top figure of this slide shows the time series of daily flows at the USGS Fort Jones gauge from September 2020 to present, along with the precipitation near the Fort Jones gauge, which is shown in the blue lines. The shaded red background shows when the emergency regulations have been in effect, and the red line shows the minimum in-stream flow requirements of those regulations. The figure on the bottom is the time series of average Scott Valley groundwater elevation data as provided by UC Davis. As you can see, the groundwater levels fluctuate over the seasons, but there is an overall increasing trend year to year. As of November 2024, fall groundwater levels are at the highest level recorded in the past 5 years. These elevated groundwater levels may be the result of a variety of factors, including curtailments and groundwater local cooperative solutions. Improved groundwater levels have contributed to increases in in-stream flows with less precipitation, as seen in August of 2024. Examples of recent improved flow conditions relative to similar amounts of precipitation in 2022 occurred in 2023 and 24. Specifically, on December 7, 2023, flows at the Fort Jones gauge reached over 250 CFS after precipitation of 4.56 inches. Similarly, in fall of 2024, flows exceeded the 60 CFS minimum requirement in November with less than 2 inches of cumulative rainfall. This is a noticeable improvement compared to 2022 when similar rainfall yielded significantly lower flows. This figure represents the time series from October 2017 to present for daily flows at the Wairika gauge in the Shasta River watershed. Flows are in blue, and precipitation near the Wairika gauge in the Shasta is shown in green. The shaded red areas again show where the emergency regulation was in effect, and the red line shows the emergency minimum flows. As shown in this graphic, curtailments under the emergency regulation have been very effective in maintaining higher flows during the dry season, better supporting the needs of the salmon fisheries in the Shasta River. As you know, those participating in the Groundwater Local Cooperative Solution Program during the 2024 irrigation season were required to meter their groundwater diversions and report their water use. This was a big undertaking, and staff have identified multiple areas of improvement, including the timely installation of groundwater meters, as well as timely collection and reporting of water use measurements. These are items that staff will be working to improve in the coming irrigation season if the emergency regulation is readopted. During the 2024 irrigation season, staff received proposals that covered more than 15,000 acres in the Scott Valley, which is more than 85% of the groundwater irrigated acreage. This slide summarizes meters in place in 2024 and meters proposed for future irrigation seasons. State Water Board financial assistance has been underused, and continues to be available for metering equipment. Staff encourage the agricultural community to take advantage of available funding for groundwater metering, which can also support their agricultural operations. This slide provides an example of how metering is used to understand applied water. In this example, the applicant's estimated water use was 159 inches per acre, which would require applied water rates of 109 inches per acre or less under the 30% local cooperative solution. After installing a meter, the measured water use was actually 44 inches per acre, approximately 70% less than the initial estimated baseline. Metering allows the collection of accurate water use information, which is critical to establishing baseline water usage and supports improved water use assumptions that may be helpful for modeling or other efforts aimed at meeting the diverse water needs of the watersheds.